What do we know about Hitler's drug use? Why did it start, and who were its enablers? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Hello, I'm Alex and welcome to the History Chronicles. If you like our work, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel in return for exclusive perks, please visit our Patreon page. Now, on with the video. Today's History Chronicle begins in 1945, in the closing weeks of the Second World War. At this time, the German Chancellor and head of the Nazi regime, Adolf Hitler, had relocated to Berlin as the Soviet-Russian armies closed in on the German capital from the east, and the armies of the British and the United States and other allies were pouring into Western Germany. Many studies have been written about Hitler's final days, but few until recent years focused on his physical health. During the final weeks of his life, the German Chancellor was falling apart health-wise from a range of ailments. But most significantly, he was suffering drastic withdrawal symptoms from a huge range of drugs which he had been taking for years. Here, we explore Hitler's drug use and how it had drastically impacted both on himself and on the course of the war. Throughout his life, Hitler suffered from various ailments and health problems. Central to these from early in his life were stomach and colon problems, which were most likely caused by irritable bowel syndrome. These gradually became worse over the course of his life. A highly neurotic individual, Hitler was also prone to insomnia, depression and panic attacks, as well as more minor issues such as eczema and an eye inflammation. In response to these, he had developed a healthy lifestyle, being a vegetarian, a non-smoker, and only very rarely drinking alcohol of any kind. Nevertheless, his afflictions continued, and it was a result of these that he came into contact with Dr. Theodor Morell, several years after assuming power in Germany. Theodor Gilbert Morell was born in Upper Hesse in Germany in 1886. He studied medicine in Paris before returning to Germany to become an obstetrician and gynecologist in Munich in 1910. He served in the First World War before relocating to Berlin in 1918. Here he married Hannelore Moller, a wealthy actress, with whose funding Morell was able to begin conducting extensive research into experimental medicine. He was soon well known, though the efficacy of his treatments remains highly debatable. As a result, he received invites during the 1920s to act as a personal physician to several heads of state. However, his future lay in Germany, and in 1933 he joined the Nazi Party upon their rise to power. In 1936 he was appointed as Hitler's personal physician, having previously wheedled his way into the party echelons by allegedly curing the German Chancellor's photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. Morell's methods, as noted, were highly unconventional for their time. Some of them included the administration of high doses of certain vitamins, an approach which has actually gained more currency in recent times. However, many of his other remedies were less defensible, including the use of tonics of certain chemicals and drugs, the medical efficacy of which has never been sustained. While he also engaged in the use of regular injections on a daily basis, but these would only grow to become highly extensive in later years. In the mid-1930s, Morell's treatments for Hitler were limited, and in any event were being used to tackle rather minimal issues such as cramps and rashes. Later, as Hitler's medical problems mounted exponentially, the treatment methods used by Morell and the dangerous quality and amounts of drugs he was administering would become much more controversial. Yet, even in 1936 and 1937 there was skepticism about Morell amongst others close to Hitler. Several of the senior party ministers, such as Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, were entirely dismissive of his medical credentials. Whilst writing years later in his memoirs, the Minister of Armaments and War Production Albert Speer related how shortly after Morell became Hitler's personal physician, Speer himself visited the doctor, for what he subsequently understood to have been a form of nervous exhaustion. Morell prescribed a bizarre concoction of bacteria supplements, hormones, vitamins and drugs, an approach which another doctor which Speer visited shortly thereafter completely discredited. Yet Hitler continued to recommend his personal physician to others in the years ahead, including the head of the Italian state and Germany's wartime ally, Benito Mussolini. For several years, the German Chancellor's drug use and the administration of medicines by Morell was not overly problematic. However, the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 saw a steady increase in the number of drugs being administered to Hitler by Morell. This was not unusual in the Third Reich. A recent groundbreaking study of the use of drugs in Nazi Germany has, for instance, highlighted how Germany soldiers were essentially fueled by a methamphetamine drug called Pervitin during the war, and that the infamous Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, which saw so much of Europe conquered between 1939 and 1941, was driven in part by the ability of German soldiers to stay awake for days on end, consuming large quantities of Pervitin. Hitler's drug use similarly increased during the course of the war, though there were medical reasons for this. It is widely believed that from about 1940 onwards he was suffering from Parkinson's disease, in addition to his previous ailments. Then, as his drug use itself began to cause further problems during the course of the 1940s, his doses were increased. Finally, on the 20th of July 1944, Hitler was injured in an assassination attempt in his Wolfslayer headquarters near Rastenburg in East Prussia. He suffered a perforated eardrum as well as some other minor wounds, all of which added to his overall poor health. These then were the circumstances under which Hitler's drug use escalated during the course of the late 1930s and early 1940s. But what exactly was he taking, or being given by Morel, as the case may be? It is estimated that at points in the 1940s Morel was either prescribing through pills or administering through multiple injections each day upwards of 90 different drugs or substances. Some of these, admittedly, were quite benign. For instance, at Hitler's own personal request, Morel gave him chamomile for his intestinal problems. Others would have actually been helpful, such as the cocktail of vitamins which Morel administered. But others were hard drugs. Hitler was, for example, taking Pervitin, the methamphetamine being given to the rank and file of the German army. He was also being given large caffeine supplements. For his eye issues, the German Chancellor was taking cocaine, while there were large doses of barbiturates as well, and then there were the opiates in the form of oxycodone to act as a painkiller for his various ailments. Finally, in order to sleep at the end of the day, having taken so many stimulants, Morel increasingly used tranquilizers on Hitler. Beyond these, there were just downright bizarre supplements, including injections of bovine solutions and animal fats, as well as various enzymes. One of the most peculiar was surely omnidin, a mixture of protein compounds, lipids and animal fats. Others included ocarin, a form of bovine testosterone. It is important to emphasize that Hitler seems to have been strikingly unaware that he was taking these strange concoctions, not even some of the hard drugs he was being injected with or swallowing. Rather, his faith in Morel seems to have been so absolute that he trusted him with whatever he prescribed. The net result of all this drug use on the course of the war can only be conjectured at. As the head of the German state during the Second World War, Hitler was responsible for making decisions on which the fate of millions of people depended. Yet many historians have argued that his drug use cannot be held responsible for the worst atrocities of the Nazi state. These were byproducts of the odious characters and belief of the German Chancellor and the other leaders of the Third Reich, not Hitler's drug use. Yet there are ways in which Hitler's decision-making, if it was impaired by his drug use, might have resulted in far more deaths than there need to have been at certain points during the war. For instance, might Hitler's reluctance to issue winter clothing early on enough to the German armies on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1941 have been caused by his less than sober state of mind? Similarly, could Hitler's drug use explain some of the individuals who were appointed to oversee Europe's concentration camps or occupied territories during the later years of the war? Had some of these brutal individuals not been appointed, then many lives might have been saved in the camps, or in regions such as Czechoslovakia, where the psychotic Reinhard Heydrich was appointed as an interim governor in the autumn of 1941. But perhaps most significantly, had Hitler not been totally racked by his drug use by 1945, maybe a more sober and sane approach to the ending of the war might have been possible. This could have avoided the terrible suffering experienced by Berliners and East Germans in the spring of 1945, during which time, instead, boys and old men were conscripted into the German army, and tens of thousands of women were raped by the advancing Red Army. As the war went on, there were many who began to question Morel's methods. As seen, leading Nazi officials such as Speer and others like the head of the German Air Force and Hitler's designated successor for much of the war, Hermann Göring, believed Morel was effectively a quack. But in the final years of the war, these complaints were increasingly coming from other doctors who were called in to assist with specific ailments that Hitler was suffering from. Several questioned Morel's methods and the drugs he was prescribing, while others argued that Morel was simply misdiagnosing what was causing Hitler's pains. Yet all were seemingly silenced by morale before their reservations could be made known to the Führer. In the end, it was the drying up of the drugs themselves which led to the doctor's fall from Hitler's graces. A study by medical professionals in 2005 concluded that, given the amount he was being prescribed by Morell, Hitler must have been addicted to amphetamines and several other substances by 1944 and 1945. But in the final stages of the war, as the Allies closed in on Berlin, many of the supply lines for these drugs to reach Morell started to collapse. As such, the German Chancellor found himself without the drugs that had fueled him for so long, as Morell could not source them for his daily injections. It was his inability to provide Hitler with the substances he was so dependent on in the final days of the war that finally caused the German Chancellor to break with him. Shortly before Hitler's death, Morell could only offer his patient a glucose shot when he needed a lift, to which Hitler responded by dismissing Morell and threatening to have him shot. Thus, we even have to consider that Hitler's thoughts and actions in the very final days of his life in the Reich Chancellery bunker in Berlin were profoundly shaped and influenced by the extreme drug withdrawals he would have been experiencing. And what of Theodor Morell himself in the end? He accumulated a vast fortune in the 1940s by gaining licenses to sell his experimental vitamin cocktails to the German army. He was captured by American troops on the 18th of May 1945. At the time, he was described as a gross but deflated old man of cringing manners, inarticulate speech, and the hygienic habits of a pig. Despite being held under arrest for some time though, and despite his close proximity to Hitler during the war, he was never charged with a crime. He died at Tegernsee Hospital in Bavaria on the 26th of May 1948. As such, the man who had potentially added to the chaos of the Second World War by fueling Adolf Hitler with a bizarre cocktail of drugs throughout it, did not long survive the conflict himself. You have been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of Hitler's drug use. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you'd like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.